Hello guys and welcome to episode 4. I know I've been gone for a month, I've been really busy. So in the last video what we did was we created our CRUD APIs, as you can see, post, get, delete and put. We have also, just a reminder, we have divided our project into different folders. So we have the routes here, and each route points to a certain function in our controller, which is our API. And here of course we have the request, response, and in this video we're going to see the next object. And of course we have our service folder in which we have operations. We are using Mongoose. Of course, we also have our models, our schema, and of course, using that schema, we create a model. And then we use that model to perform our operations that we need. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new collection. So now we have the books collection, but we're going to create another collection, which is the author. So each book has an author, of course, and an author can have multiple books. We're going to see how we're going to design that and how we're going to perform operations and create APIs that will return certain data, meaningful data, in our response. We will also see how we can handle our errors. So we're going to create a global error handler as a middleware, and here, instead of that, if result response with send, else response with send error, we're going to have a proper try catch block, and in our servers we're going to be throwing the errors that we're going to catch in our controller, and using the next block, the next parameter, we're going to pass our error to our middleware, and we're going to explain how that works, and we're going to see of course we're going to see it into practice. So stay tuned and please leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and let's go. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a schema and a model for our author. So just like we did here with the book, I'm going to copy this, and in our models folder, let's go ahead and create a new file, author.js. I'm going to paste that, and of course we need to import Mongoose so that we can create a new Mongoose schema, and here I'm going to call it author, so author schema. And here we have the fields. So an author has a name, a country, so where he comes from, an age, it's going to be number, and then let's say date of birth, which is going to be a date of type date. And of course here we're going to create the model that we're going to be using. So here for the model name, let's say author, and just a quick reminder, whatever name we have here, okay, this will be taken, the A will be in lowercase, and then an S will be added. So just like we did here in the book, capital B, it will be interpreted this way. So smaller b and then an s will be added. That's how it works. And then we need to pass in the schema. So my bad here. So let's take author schema, and this is it. Now we need to have a relationship between the book and the author. First thing, let me just remind you that with MongoDB, it's very flexible. So I could have here, for example, for this book, let's say, I could have here an author object. So I could have author and then JavaScript object, just like we know. It would have the name, the age, and so on. Like, you could do it, no one's stopping you. And we could also have many different ways to put that data and to store it. But the way I'm gonna do it, and which I think is the most common, is here in our book.js, in our schema, book schema, instead of having an author string, now we're gonna have an ID. So the ID that's gonna be generated for this author is gonna be used, which is unique by the way, is gonna be used here to specify that this book belongs to this author. So the type is gonna be mongoose.schema.types.object_id, and let's save that. And just a reminder that MongoDB creates this ID field for us, which is unique. Please note that also another way how this could have been done is that instead of having this author here for the books, or even instead of having this whole collection, which is here, the books collection, we could have created inside the author schema, we could have created a field called books, which is an array of objects, and each object is a book, of course, and then we would have those fields inside of it. So it would look like that. And then each author would directly have a books field which is an array of book objects, different book objects, and of course we wouldn't have the author here anymore. But again, it's cleaner to have them in separate tables, and we're gonna see how we can join them and then return them. Of course, this is a good thing that we have 3 different methods of doing it. So if you recall, the first one was here we have a complex object, an author, a nested, you could say it's a nested document. It's called a nested document because it would be a document inside another one. So this one here, those are nested documents inside this bigger document, which is an author document. I hope I'm making sense now. And the second way would be having the author here, the author object, not just the ID. And the third way is the one that we are doing right now, which is just storing the ID itself, not the whole object. Let's now go to the routes and create an author.js file. I'm gonna come here and take those. So here, let's remove the book controller, book validator. I'm gonna keep the express validation because we're gonna be adding validation, of course. I'm gonna remove those routes. And then here, of course, we're not gonna have book create, we're gonna have author create. And I'm gonna remove the validation here. And of course, we need to use another controller, not the book controller that we have, but an author controller that we're gonna create right now. Let's go to the controllers folder, new file, and let's create author.js. And of course, here we're gonna do just like we did here. We're gonna create a class which is gonna be author controller, and it's gonna have different APIs, different functions. So module.exports equal class, let's call it author controller, and let's have one function for now, async, and let's say create author. Of course, we have the request, response, and next. For now, that's what we need. Now that we have our author controller and we are exporting it to the outside, we can use it in a different folder, in a different file, which is going to be here. So let's say const author controller equal new. Of course, we're using, my bad, first we need to require it, so we need to import it, require double dot slash, and then we need to go to the controllers folder slash author. Now, since it's a class, we need to create a new instance of that class, so let's go ahead and do that. So const author controller equal new author controller, which we just imported right here. And now here what we can do is, instead of having this book controller, let's go ahead and use that author controller object, and let's call the create author function. So now we know that whenever we call this route, this is the API we're actually calling. This is what's going to be executing. Here we will need to import the service, which we don't have yet, so let's go ahead and create it. So in our service folder, let's go ahead and create a new file, author.js. And just like we did here, we're going to be importing the model. Of course, not this model, but the author model, which was this one. So let's go back here and let's say const author model, or of course you can call it author or whatever you want, require dot dot. It's not finding it. Okay, that's because I didn't type it correctly. Dot dot model slash author. Let's save that. And again, we're going to be using a class, and this is exported directly, so equal class author service. And then here we're going to have the same function as we have here. Of course, you don't have to use the same name, but I will be using the same name just for consistency. It's a good practice. So I'm going to say that, and here, of course, what we're going to have is we're going to be receiving a parameter which is going to be the author that you want to save. So I'm going to call it author to create or to save. I'm going to save it for now. and back in our controller here we can import it now. So let's say const author service equal require services slash author, and then here we're gonna create an instance of that object. So author service equal new and then author service. Now here what we can do is, of course, since we're using async, we need to await. So await author service dot create author, and as you remember we have to pass in the author created, and if you recall last time we said that the body of the request is where we're going to be sending the JSON object. So request dot body. Let's save that, and then after that we can say res dot end. When we do that, we're not responding, like we're not returning anything back, like we're just returning the success message, which is the success status code, which is 200. But if we want, we could say res.end, and then here we could, let's say, const response or result equal await, and then here we can pass in the response. Of course, the response is going to be the object that we're going to create. Alright, let's go back to the service, and here let's do what we should be doing, which is create a new instance of our model that we're gonna save. So let's say const author equal new author model. So we're creating a new instance of that model, and that model, if you recall, is this right here. So in the models folder where we have our author schema, and then we import the model that we have created, the author model. We are creating an instance of it, and then here we can pass in a document, an object, where we pass in the fields, or we can directly, since we are gonna be receiving the actual object in the same format, we can just pass it in just like that, which is quicker. And then what we can do is return await, and then if you recall, author.save. Now when we say await the instance that we just created from the model.save, it's gonna save that document in our collection. Of course, we don't have the collection yet, but we are gonna have it soon when we call that API and we pass in the document to save. Now let's go to our server here, and we will need to import that route here. Of course, we are exporting it here, and that's why we can import the router back here. So just like we did with the book router, we're gonna say const author router equal require dot slash routes slash author this time, and we will add it here. So app.use author router. Now by doing this, we can be calling this endpoint, which is gonna be calling this API, which is gonna create the author that we pass. Before forgetting, let's go back to our validations, and here in our book validation, last time when we had the author, we didn't have an actual model for our author, so we were just using a string and we would pass in a name. But now our books model has the author field, which is of type object ID. So of course we need to change that, we need to make that change in our validation. And to be able to do it, there's a certain type that requires a certain package, and that package is this one, GOI.objectID. So I'm gonna copy that, and then here I'm gonna paste it, npm install this package. And to be able to use it, if we take a quick look here, we just take this, paste it here, and now we have this type GOI.objectID, which is gonna be here instead of the string. And of course we want it to be required, so dot required, and let's save this. Now let's create one more validation file, which is for the author, so author.js. I'm gonna copy that, let's paste it here, let's fix this to author validations. author validations and create or update author validator. And of course here we need to have the fields that we have in our author schema, which are those four. So let's take that, and in our validation let's come here and paste them. And of course we need to specify the objects, the types, so GUI.string.required, country as well, the age is gonna be a number, and then the date of birth is gonna be a GUI.date, and let's save that. Now we need to use that validation somewhere, and of course we're going to be using it in our controller, in our routes, just like we did last time. If you recall, we put the validation here after the routes and before pointing to the function that's going to be called, and we will be using this validate function from this express validation package. So let's say validate, and we need to pass in the validator here. Of course we need to import that, just like you know. So let's say author validator or validations equal require dot slash validations slash author. Let's save that, and here let's say author validations dot create or update validator. Let's save that, and let's use Postman to test our API. So here in Postman, if you recall, let's take a look at our route again. /author/create, and now if we run the app, so let's say nodemon server, it's listening on port 3000, which I already added here, localhost port 3000, and then let's add the endpoint for our API that we created, which is of type post, router.post. And now, of course, if we try to send an empty body, it's gonna be 400 bad request, because of course the validation failed. We did not respect the validation that we set up. So let's go ahead and create the object with respect to the validation that we have created. So name, let's say John, age, let's say 30, date of birth. Now I'm not sure of the format here, but let's try this. Again, it might give me an error, I'm not sure. And we had country as well. Let's try to send this, and as you can see, it worked out. We have this object that was just created, this new document, and if you recall, we have got the response here because in our controller, the author controller, we are sending the response, which we returned here, which is the saved document, which is the exact document that we just created. And to make sure that it's working, let's refresh, and you will notice we have a new collection which is called authors, which has our new author right here. Now back in our books collection, if we take a look at the books that we've created the last time, back then we had the author field which was of type string, and if we take a look here you can see string, but now it's of type object ID, and of course we're not going to do this manually. I'm gonna delete this, so drop collection, we need to type in the collection name, and now let's create a new book, but this time the validation has changed. The author should be passed as an object ID. Of course we've changed it in the model as well. And now, since we have an author, let's go ahead and create some books for that author. Let's pick this object ID because we're gonna need it, and in Postman let's go ahead and create a new request, which is gonna be in localhost 3000 /books/create. Let's make sure that's correct. And the routes /book/create, so it's not books, it's book. And here the body, of course, we need to respect the validation or else it's not gonna work. We have a name, let's say past book. We have the author, and this time here we passed it as a string, but the app is smart enough to know that it's an object ID. Don't worry about it. What else did we have? We had a summary. It's gonna say blah blah blah, and we have the number of pages, let's say 300. Let's send, and we have an error, not found. Okay, so the problem is we forgot to change the method type to post. It's not a create, it's a post API, because of course we're creating the data and we're sending a body. So send, and here we have created this new object. If you go back and refresh in MongoDB Compass, if you open books, as you can see, we have the name, the author, and here this time we don't have a string with the author name. Instead, we have this object ID, which points to the same author right here. So this book belongs to this author right here. Now, of course, let's go back to the code and let's get a better response than the one we already get when we search for a book by ID. So if you recall, we had this API. Let's use it, by the way. Let's call this API, which is localhost 3000 /books /book, okay, /books. So let's call this API again, and we got an error because we did not pass the ID, of course. So the book ID is this one. Let's pass it here, or we can of course add it here, ID, the ID, send. Now as you can see, we have gotten the book, but we don't really care about the author ID, of course, in a response. What we actually care about is the content of this object. So what we care about is those fields right here, the meaningful fields. For that, we're going to be using aggregation, and I'm going to show you the documentation really quickly. So based on this definition, in MongoDB, aggregation operations process the data records or documents and return computed results. It collects values from various documents and groups them together, and then perform different types of operations. We can group data, we can sum, we can join, we can filter the data, we can do a lot with aggregation. I'm gonna keep a link in the description for the aggregations. We can see this is for filtering, the $match. We have different stages. Here, for example, we have the $match stage, which is used to filter. So here, when we say db.orders.aggregate, of course, here we need to pass in an array of different stages. So here we have the first stage, which is a match, which is used for filtering. So here we're filtering the orders collection based on the status being equal to urgent. So this will only return every document where the status is equal to urgent. And then we're grouping based on the product name, and we're getting the sum of the quantity and so on. We have a lot of stages actually. To join, we're going to be using the MongoDB aggregation lookup stage. Let's search for that. And here, if we take a look at this, it performs a left outer join. So if you're familiar with SQL, you probably know what a left outer join is. So basically, for this stage, what we need to pass in is we need to specify from which collection we're actually doing that join. So for example, here in books, we are joining with the authors collection. So the from would be authors. The local field, if we take a look here, the local field in which we're trying to make that join is the author, which is this one. So this is the field name. So local field would be author. The foreign field, of course, since it's the ID here, what's the common field in authors? It's the ID here, underscore ID. So that would be the foreign field. And then as we can specify whatever name we want, which is going to be returning the result of that join. And we're going to see that in action. We're going to create it now. So here in router.get, book by ID. Let's go here and let's go to our service again. So this is the function that we've been using so far. Return await book model.find by ID, and then we pass in the ID. Now we're going to be using aggregation instead. So let's delete this and let's say dot aggregate, and we need to pass in an array of stages. And please know that the ordering of the stages matter. So $match at the beginning, filtering at the beginning, is different than filtering at the end, because the stages, you should respect the order. They get executed one after the other, so that's why the order is important. The first stage that we're going to be using is match, and that's because we're going to be filtering, and we're going to be filtering based on the ID. We're trying to get only one book, so the field is ID, and the value that we're getting is ID. We're searching for a book which has the field ID the same value as the ID being passed. Here we need a second stage for the lookup, so let's say $lookup, and let's open that. Here we have the from field. We need to specify the collection from which we're actually getting the data, which is authors here. So authors, don't get confused. We are performing the aggregation on the book model, so on this collection, okay, and the join is being done with this collection, so from authors. The local field is author, which is this one right here, and then the foreign field would be ID. So foreign field underscore ID. Of course, we need to respect the names or it's not going to work. As here you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it author. Now this isn't enough, and I'm going to show you the result just so that you know and you learn from it. Now that's not the response that we want. We need to make some few modifications, but I'm going to show you the response that we get right now if I send this request. Okay, so this is common. When this happens, it means it didn't find anything, and which would mean that it didn't match any document with this specified rule, and that's because the ID here has been passed as a string. Sometimes it happens. When this happens, all you need to do is convert it to an ID, object ID. So we need Mongoose for that. Require Mongoose, and here we need to convert it to ID because it's a string right now, and we can check that by doing console.log type of ID. If we do that, save, and then call the API again, if we take a look at the console here, we can see string, and of course in the database it's not saved as a string, it's saved as an object ID. So let's convert it. Let's delete that, and here we can say mongoose dot types dot object ID, and we are converting this ID right here. Let's save now, go back to Postman and send, and as you can see we got the response. But if you recall, I said it's not the final response, but I want you to see and learn. So if you take a look at the response, we have an array here, although we are searching for only one book by ID, so we shouldn't get an array, we should only get one document. And of course we can do that by returning the first index of that, because the aggregation and the match stage matches more than one document. It does know that we only need one. So here, instead of returning this directly as an array, I'm gonna say const results equal, or result equal this, and then here I'm gonna return result of 0. Let's save that, and in Postman now, let's see, did it save? Okay, send, and as you can see now we no longer have an array of objects, it's just one. But yet, if we take a look here, there's still one problem. If we take a look at the author field, which by the way comes from the as here, so I could have called it whatever I want. If I save that and then send, as you can see it's called, it changed the name, but of course let's keep it meaningful. And here we have an array of authors. Now that would be fine if we had more than one author for one book, but in our application we're assuming that we only have one author. We're saying that one author has many books and the book is owned or written by one author. Of course in real applications it might be different, but when we have that case where we don't need an array of objects and it's only one, we can use a stage which is the unwind stage. Let's come here and search for it. So unwind. If we read here in the documentation, it deconstructs an array field from the input documents to output a document for each element. So instead of having an array of objects, okay, we would have different objects separated. They are not into one array anymore. They are different objects. And this is how we use it. It's a stage itself. We need to pass in the path. We need to specify the path. So here, after lookup, and that's very common to use unwind after lookup. So let's open the curly braces and $unwind, and let's specify the path. The path is author, because if you take a look, author is the array that we need to deconstruct into different objects. Here we only have one object, so it's gonna be one object only for the author. So the path is author. Let's give it here and let's save that. Now back in Postman, if we send the response, the app crashed. Let's see. Okay, here we don't have to pass in author like that. We need to specify using the $, because that's the field name. The field name should always have a $sign before that in the pipelines, and you'll get used to it. Now it might seem difficult, but practicing over and over again, you'll get used to it, don't worry. And after saving now, and let's send this, as you can see, we have one object, one book, name best book, and we have the author. The author has the ID, name, country, age, and then the book has number of pages and summary. I'm gonna show you one more stage, which is the project stage. In the project stage, we specify which fields we want shown in the response here and which fields hidden. So $project, and it's very easy. We don't have to look at the documentation. We can look if you want, but basically what we do is you specify the field. So for example, name, we say 1. Now we know that the name will be shown. If I save it like that only, we're only going to be receiving the name and the ID. Send, as you can see, name and ID. The ID is always added. If you want to disable it or hide it, you will have to manually say 0. That way we only get the name. Let's say we only need the name of the book, the summary, and the author. That's what we would do. So let's save, send. Now we only have the ID, name, author. Now let's say we don't want the date of birth, age of the author, we just want the name and the country. What we would do is, we can do that, and then here, name 1, this is the name of the author. We can say country 1. Let's say we only want those fields, and of course the ID. Send. Now we only got this response. I initially wanted to include the global error handling in this episode, and I also created the middleware and so on, and I explained. I have the clips ready, but this video is already too long, and I think a global error handling made in a proper way would actually take a whole episode by itself. So I'm gonna leave it here. Thank you for watching. Don't worry, the global error handling episode is gonna come out soon. Please leave a like if this video helped you. You can leave suggestions as usual. Subscribe if you're new, and thank you for watching.